The first thing to hit the senses was the smell, smoke and wet ash clinging to the chill air like a ghost that would not leave. The city street, once lined with small shops and street lamps, had become a jagged corridor of broken stone and skeletal walls. The sky at dusk was a heavy bruise of color, streaked in red and rust, with deeper purples bleeding into the horizon as the sun sank behind the shattered skyline. Every gust of wind stirred fine dust into the air, coating the rubble, whispering over the splintered edges of concrete like dry leaves in a forgotten autumn. Fires still burned in pockets along the street, smoldering in the husks of collapsed cars and the crumbling doorways of buildings that once held homes. Their weak orange glow flared and dimmed in the breeze, casting restless shadows that danced across the jagged ruins. At the far end of the street stood a girl, thin, almost fragile at first glance, no more than 17. The loose sleeves of her torn combat jacket flapped against her arms, the faded camouflage pattern now smeared with dirt and dried blood. Her boots were worn down to cracked leather, and her left knee was scraped and bleeding beneath a tear in her trousers. But she didn't seem to feel the cold or the sting of her wounds. In her right hand, she gripped a battered assault rifle, not as a soldier would hold a weapon, but as one holds a tool that has already served its purpose. The barrel dipped slightly, the strap frayed where it had rubbed against her shoulder through too many long days. Her other hand hung loose at her side, fingers curled, dirty nails chipped and lined with grit. Strands of dark hair, unkempt and streaked with ash, clung damply to her forehead and cheek where the sweat and drizzle met the wind. Behind her, the street curved out of sight between two gutted apartment blocks. Here and there, the outlines of old window frames stared down like hollow sockets, empty and charred. A street sign lay bent and half buried in debris, its letters scorched away so that it pointed nowhere. A toppled lamppost, its glass shattered, had been dragged aside to form part of a makeshift barricade of bricks and twisted metal. In the silence that followed the battles, the world seemed suspended. No traffic, no chatter, not even the distant thump of artillery that had once been a constant in the air. Only the soft hiss of smouldering fires and the whistle of the wind remained. The girl's eyes, sharp and dark beneath the smudges of soot on her face, scanned the street not as a lost wanderer, but as someone who knew every corner, every hidden path. Those eyes had seen too much for their age, seen the city fall from bustling life to broken ruin, watched friends vanish in the smoke of the first bombardments. As dusk deepened, the fires behind her picked up in brightness, glinting off the dull metal of her rifle and outlining her silhouette against the haze. She stood as if rooted, her back straight despite her weariness, the weight of all she had endured settling on her shoulders but not bending them. Around her feet, the ground was littered with fragments of glass and splinters of concrete that crunched softly whenever she shifted her weight. A torn backpack lay beside a cracked curb, its contents long since scattered and lost to the wind. A stray newspaper page fluttered across the street, briefly catching in a puddle of rainwater and ash before the breeze tore it away again. The air was damp, carrying a chill that seeped through clothing, but she did not shiver. A faint drizzle had begun to fall, beading on the barrel of the rifle and streaking lines through the grime on her cheeks. Far down the street, a building's upper floor gave a tired groan as its crumbled edge settled, sending a small cascade of bricks tumbling into the roadway. The sound made the girl glance that way, her jaw tightening, but she didn't move. She adjusted the rifle slightly, not in threat but in readiness, as though the ruins themselves might rise up against her. The world seemed to hold its breath with her, as if the entire street knew that the fragile quiet could shatter at any moment. The sun's final light slipped behind the broken skyline, leaving the street in the muted glow of burning debris and the deepening hues of evening. Shadows pooled in doorways and under the blackened shells of cars. From the west came the low rumble of distant thunder, promising more rain before night's end. The girl turned her face slightly to the breeze, letting the cool droplets wash away a line of ash from her temple. In the flicker of firelight, for an instant her expression softened, revealing the traces of a child who had once laughed here in better days. Then her eyes hardened again, settling on the dark mouth of the alley ahead, where she knew enemies might come. She shifted her stance, the soles of her boots grinding softly on the rubble, and moved forward a single step. The street around her seemed endless, a gauntlet of destruction stretching into the deepening dark. Yet she stood at the center of it, as if claiming the ruins themselves as her ground. Her shadow stretched long behind her in the firelight, a solitary figure carved out against the decay. The distant thunder rolled again, and a shiver of wind passed through the hollow windows like a sigh. Somewhere in the silence a bit of metal clinked against stone, faint and sharp, and her head turned slightly toward the sound, eyes narrowing. In that moment she was not a child, not even quite a soldier, but something shaped by the wreckage around her, steady, watchful, caught between the fragility of youth and the grim resilience demanded by war. The dusk settled in fully, the sky above streaked with the first pale sliver of a rising moon, and the girl stood alone on the ruined street, holding her ground as the city itself seemed to wait, listening to the heartbeat of the night. The alley that led into the heart of the ruined city was a narrow channel between buildings that had once stood tall and proud. Now the walls on either side leaned inward, as though conspiring to block out the sky, their facades cracked and blackened by fire. Jagged shards of window glass clung to warped frames, glinting faintly in the low glow of scattered fires. Puddles had formed in the potholes of the cracked street, dark mirrors for the orange sparks drifting down from still-burning timbers. The air smelled of scorched metal and damp ashes, heavy and sour in the lungs. Every step stirred fine dust into the drizzle that had begun to fall again, softening the sharp edges of rubble, but not its menace. The first of the mercenaries stepped into this alley with the quiet confidence of a man who believed the worst had already passed. He wore heavy black tactical armor, scuffed with mud and soot, his boots crunching over debris that no longer seemed to faze him. A thick scarf was wrapped around his neck, wet with rain and ash, and his helmet's visor reflected the dim flicker of flames from somewhere down the street. Behind him came three more figures, all equally burdened with rifles, ammunition, and grim expressions. The fifth man brought up the rear, his gaze flicking back often as though he didn't fully trust the silence. The leader raised one gloved hand, and the line halted. Without a word, he gestured with two fingers toward a bend in the alley ahead. The mercenaries' movements were efficient, practiced. They shifted their grips on their weapons, fingers brushing triggers, shoulders tightening beneath rain-slicked body armor. One man knelt briefly, checking the ground for tripwires or mines, but found nothing, only shards of brick and a spent cartridge half buried in the wet dust. The sound of distant thunder rolled over the city, followed by the hollow clatter of loose metal somewhere high above. As if the skeleton of the ruined street was shifting in its sleep, their breathing was the loudest sound in that narrow passage, harsh through the filters of their masks. Occasionally the drizzle picked up, pattering softly against their helmets, running in small rivulets down the scarred walls. Each man carried his rifle at a ready angle, the barrels sweeping the shadows as they advanced. The glow of a distant fire, shining faintly through the mist and drizzle, turned the wet cobbles into a river of dull red reflections. A rat darted across the alley, vanishing into a heap of broken crates. One of the men muttered under his breath, quickly silenced by a sharp glance from the leader. Above them, the gutted windows of the buildings seemed to watch like dark, empty eyes. Torn curtains fluttered in the broken frames, their edges dripping rain, swaying as if stirred by an unseen breath. Somewhere a door creaked, and then banged softly in the wind, an irregular rhythm that made one of the younger mercenaries tense his shoulders. He shifted his grip on the rifle, the knuckles of his gloves whitening, as though the noise might suddenly leap out of the shadows at them. The leader crouched briefly, studying the bend ahead. Beyond it, the alley widened into an open intersection, littered with the skeletons of burned-out cars. He gave a signal, 2 fingers raised, then circling, and the second man nodded, easing forward a few steps, rifle raised, eyes fixed on the opening. The drizzle had become steadier now, soaking their uniforms and darkening their gloves, dripping off the barrels of their rifles. Raindrops struck the puddles with soft plips, tiny sounds that felt loud in the taut quiet. In the shadows beyond the intersection, movement flickered, a faint, barely there shift, like a wisp of mist stirred by the breeze. The leader froze, raising a fist to halt his squad. They lowered themselves slightly, knees bent, muzzles turning toward the dark corners. The air felt heavier, almost holding its breath with them. A distant crash echoed faintly, something falling far down the ruined street, and then silence fell again. Broken only by the soft percussion of rain, the man at the rear glanced upward, uneasy, his eyes tracing the line of the buildings where broken girders jutted out like ribs. The roof lines loomed dark against the bruised sky, and somewhere in the shadows above, he thought he saw a flicker of movement. It might have been a loose tarp shifting in the wind, or a length of metal swinging on a bent nail. But the feeling lingered that eyes were on them, following their slow progress, measuring their steps. As they inched forward again, their boots slid slightly on wet stone. The rain blurred the glow of distant fires into smears of red and gold that quivered in every puddle. The leader lifted his rifle a little higher, his expression tightening behind the visor. He'd led men through ambushes before, and the stillness of this street made his skin prickle beneath the armor. He knew that in war, the worst danger often came not from the visible, but from the unseen. The enemy who waited until you believed the way was clear. When they reached the mouth of the intersection, the leader crouched again, scanning the space with a practiced eye. The square was littered with debris, chunks of fallen wall, shattered glass, a half-buried tire. 2 burned cars, their frames rusted and twisted, sat like silent sentinels in the rain. Puddles reflected the broken windows of surrounding buildings, and drops from overhead eaves created tiny ripples that spread in slow rings across the water. He raised a fist to stop the others and tilted his head slightly, listening. For a moment, even the rain seemed to hush, as if the night itself was straining to hear. He gestured to his men, signaling them to spread out and cover the angles. They moved with slow, deliberate precision, checking doorways and windows, muzzles always tracking ahead. The street lamp poles that once lit the square were now bent or toppled, their wires dangling like black vines. The drizzle caught on them, dripping in a steady rhythm onto the broken pavement. The team advanced another few steps, their boots crunching on shards of glass, and the leader raised his rifle higher still, scanning the rooftops. No words were exchanged. They had all fought long enough to know that talk invited attention. The silence, filled only with the wet sound of rain, made the space seem even larger, emptier, as if the city itself had withdrawn and left only its bones. The alley behind them stretched away into darkness, a narrow throat leading back toward the ruins they had come through. Ahead lay more shadows, deeper and somehow heavier, as if they hid not just darkness, but the weight of eyes watching from unseen places. At that moment, a gust of wind blew through the alley, carrying with it a faint clatter, something small, perhaps a pebble, tumbling from a height to strike the pavement below. Every man in the squad froze, rifles snapping up, breath caught in their throats. For an instant, nothing moved except the slow drift of rain through the glow of distant fires. Then the leader signaled again, 2 fingers pointing forward, and the squad advanced once more, deeper into the heart of the ruined city, each step echoing softly off the damp walls as they disappeared into the waiting night.